September 1st, 1939, 4:45 a.m. A German battleship opens fire on a Polish fortress. Within hours, 1.5 million German troops flood across the border. Within days, Poland is fighting for survival on two fronts. Within weeks, it vanishes from the map carved up by Hitler and Stalin. This isn't just how World War II began. This is the story of a nation that refused to die quietly, of soldiers who held out for 7 days when they were told to hold for 12 hours, of a betrayal so deep it would reshape the 20th century. Welcome to the September campaign, the 36 days that changed everything. By August 1939, Adolf Hitler had swallowed Austria and dismantled Czechoslovakia. Now he wanted Poland. But he had a problem. Germany couldn't fight France, Britain, and Poland while leaving the Soviet Union at its back. The solution? A deal with the devil. On August 23, 1939, German Foreign Minister Ribbentrop and Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov signed a pact that shocked the world. Officially, it promised peace between Nazi Germany and Communist Russia. Secretly, it carved Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. The line ran straight through Poland west to Germany, east to the USSR. Hitler had his insurance policy. Stalin would wait, watch Poland bleed, and strike from behind. But Hitler needed a pretext. Enter Operation Himmler's false flag attacks. On August 31st, German agents in Polish uniforms attacked a radio station at Gleiwitz. They left behind corpses, concentration camp prisoners, dressed as soldiers, and broadcast fake anti-German messages. The next morning, Hitler addressed the Reichstag. Last night, Polish regular soldiers fired on our territory. Since 5:45 a.m., we have been returning fire. It was a lie, but it worked. Or rather, it didn't need to work. Hitler wasn't convincing the world. He was giving his army permission to unleash hell. Poland saw it coming. Intelligence had cracked German codes. They knew the invasion was imminent, but they faced an impossible choice. Full mobilization might provoke Hitler. Partial mobilization meant being unprepared. The French and British urged caution. So Poland hesitated, caught between the certainty of German aggression and the desperate hope that diplomacy might save them. It couldn't. At 4:45 a.m. on September 1st, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein, visiting Danzig on a courtesy call, opened fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte. The first shots of World War II had been fired, and they announced a revolution in warfare. The Germans called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war, and it descended on Poland like nothing the world had ever seen. Imagine waking to screaming engines, not artillery, but Stuka dive bombers plummeting from the sky, their Jericho trumpets wailing. They hit airfields first, destroying the Polish Air Force on the ground. Then railroads, bridges, command centers. Poland's nervous system was being severed before its army could react. But the real revolution was on the ground. German panzer divisions, tanks, motorized infantry, artillery didn't attack where Poles were strongest. They punched through where they were weakest, then drove deep behind enemy lines. This wasn't trench warfare. This was speed, chaos, annihilation. The plan, Fall Weiss, was brutal elegance. Army Group North would strike from Pomerania and East Prussia, cutting off the Polish corridor. Army Group South would attack from Silesia, driving toward the Vistula. The pincers would close on Warsaw. The Polish army would be encircled and destroyed, and it worked almost perfectly. Within 48 hours, Polish air power was gone. Within a week, German tanks reached Warsaw's suburbs. The Polish army, brave but outgunned, found itself fighting a war from the past against an enemy from the future. But here's what the mythology gets wrong. The Poles didn't just collapse. They didn't charge tanks with cavalry swords. That's Nazi propaganda. What they actually did was more remarkable. At the Battle of Massacre, September 1st to 2nd, Polish cavalry fighting as mobile infantry with anti-tank guns stopped the German 4th Panzer Division cold, destroying over 50 tanks. At the Bzura River in mid-September, Polish forces counterattacked so ferociously that Germany had to divert forces from Warsaw. The problem wasn't Polish courage. It was Polish geometry. Their strategy required holding the frontiers, trading space for time until France and Britain attacked from the west. But with Germans moving 20 to 30 miles daily, there was no time. And the French and British? They stayed behind their defenses, watching. By September 8th, German troops were in Warsaw's suburbs. By September 14th, the government fled to Romania. The capital was surrounded, but Warsaw refused to surrender. And 200 miles east, another army was massing one that would transform national tragedy into existential nightmare. Before we follow the collapse, we must pause at the beginning. Because on that first morning, while the world held its breath, 205 Polish soldiers held a tiny peninsula against impossible odds and wrote one of the war's most heroic chapters. Westerplatte, a forested peninsula in the free city of Danzig, guarding the port's ammunition depot. By treaty, Poland could station 88 men there. Through clever deception, soldiers leaving as civilians, workers arriving in uniform, Major Henryk Saharsky had built his force to 205 soldiers with field guns, mortar, and machine guns. They were ordered to hold for 12 hours. They held for 7 days. At 4:47 a.m., the Schleswig-Holstein opened fire from 150 meters. 8 minutes later, German Marines stormed through breaches in the wall. They walked into a kill zone. Polish crossfire pinned them down. Anti-tank guns fired on the battleship itself. By 6:22 a.m., the Germans retreated, 16 dead, 120 wounded. Polish losses? 4 dead. The Germans were stunned. General Eberhard had promised a quick victory. Now he faced a siege. What followed was escalating brutality. On September 2nd, 60 Stuka bombers, nearly the entire available force, dropped 26 tons of bombs. They destroyed the radio, food stores, killed 8 defenders. Staff Sergeant Wojciech Nesaryk became the war's first fatal casualty. The Germans tried everything: naval bombardment, heavy artillery, flamethrowers, burning fuel trains sent down tracks. Each time, the Poles held. By September 7th, they were out of food. Their medical station was destroyed. Gangrene spread among the wounded. Saharsky, suffering shell shock, suggested surrender. His second-in-command, Captain Dabrowski, refused. They would hold. But after another bombardment with flamethrowers, Saharsky made the call. At 9:45 a.m. on September 7th, the white flag rose. General Eberhard was so impressed he allowed Saharsky to keep his saber a soldier's respect. German troops stood at attention as the garrison marched out, heads high, after 7 days of hell. 15 Polish dead, 50 German dead. A symbol of resistance born that would outlast the war itself. But while Westerplatte burned, the trap was closing from the east. On September 17, 1939, with Polish armies still fighting in the center of the country, Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov delivered a speech of breathtaking cynicism. The Polish-German War, he declared, has revealed Poland's internal instability. Warsaw no longer exists. The Polish government has scattered. This means the Polish state has ceased to exist. Every word was a lie. Warsaw still held. The government functioned. The army fought. But Molotov wasn't speaking to truth. He was speaking to justification. At 3 a.m., Polish Ambassador Grzybowski was summoned to the Kremlin. The USSR would cross the border to protect Ukrainians and Belarusians in eastern Poland. Grzybowski refused to accept the document. It didn't matter. At 4:40 a.m., 600,000 Red Army soldiers with 4,700 tanks crossed a 500-mile front. Stalin had waited precisely long enough, letting Germany do the bleeding, watching Poland commit its reserves to the west. Now he struck the defenseless east. Polish resistance was fierce but futile. At Grodno, defenders held for 2 days of street fighting. At Koziaus, Polish cavalry charged Soviet armor. At Shak, Border Protection Corps fought for 48 hours. But the tragedy wasn't just military, it was personal. Polish soldiers who'd fought Germans for 17 days suddenly faced Soviet tanks. Many surrendered willingly, believing the Soviets were allies. General Langner's defense of Olwe ended with Soviet promises that officers could cross to Romania. Instead, they were shipped to camps at Starobilsk, Kozelsk, and Ostashkov. Most would be murdered in the Katyn Forest massacre in April 1940. The double invasion made Poland's position impossible. On September 17th, Marshal Ryd-Smigły ordered forces to retreat toward Romania and Hungary. The government crossed the border that day. Thousands of soldiers followed. The Germans and Soviets advanced toward their predetermined line, the Narew, Vistula, and San rivers. On September 22nd, they held a joint parade at Brest-Litovsk, officers shaking hands, celebrating their shared victory. On September 28th, Ribbentrop flew to Moscow to sign the German-Soviet Treaty of Friendship. The secret protocols were adjusted. The predators had divided the carcass. Poland, which had existed for just 20 years after 123 years of partition, vanished again. But the killing was only beginning. While the government fled and the army retreated, Warsaw refused to bend. By September 8th, German tanks reached the suburbs. But the city was defended not just by soldiers, but by thousands of civilian volunteers, the Citizens' Guard, fighting from barricades, windows, sewers. General Johannes Blaskowitz bombarded the city with artillery and airstrikes, hoping to break morale. Stuka screamed down daily. Fires raged. Water and electricity failed. Food ran short. But Warsaw held. On September 16th, General Valerian Schumann rejected a German surrender demand. Polish sappers blew bridges. Civilians built barricades overnight. German attacks on September 19th to 20th were repulsed with heavy losses. The end came from the east. When the Soviets invaded, Warsaw's position became impossible. Surrounded, out of ammunition, facing starvation, Schumann surrendered on September 27th after 18 days of siege. Between 18,000 and 40,000 civilians died. German casualties were surprisingly high, perhaps 1,500 dead and 5,000 wounded. Warsaw had extracted a heavy price. But the occupation would prove more brutal than the siege. In the German zone, Einsatzgruppen followed the army, hunting political leaders, intellectuals, clergy. By October, concentration camps appeared first for Polish elites, later for extermination. Auschwitz, built in 1940 on Polish soil, would become the symbol of industrialized murder. The Soviet zone was different in method, identical in intent. The NKVD arrested 200,000 soldiers and targeted landowners, priests, civil servants. Between 1939 to 1941, approximately 1.5 million Polish citizens were deported to Siberia and Kazakhstan. Packed in cattle cars, many died en route. Survivors faced slave labor in 40 below temperatures. In April 1940, the NKVD executed 22,000 Polish officers and intellectuals at Katyn and other sites bound, shot in the back of the head, buried in mass graves. The Soviets would blame the Nazis until 1990. Both occupiers sought to erase Polish identity. Hans Frank declared, "Poland shall be treated like a colony. The Poles will become slaves. Universities closed. Children educated only to 4th grade. Cities renamed. Wadki became Litzmannstadt." In the Soviet zone, property was collectivized. the Polish language suppressed, churches closed. History was rewritten. Poland's 1,000-year existence dismissed as fascist imperialism. The Jewish population faced particular horror. In the German zone, immediate ghettization, first WWII, then Warsaw. Over 400,000 Jews would be crowded into the Warsaw ghetto, walled in, starved, deported to Treblinka. Yet even under dual occupation, Poland refused to disappear. An underground state emerged: parallel government, military arm, intelligence network, schools, courts, newspapers. The Armia Krajowa Home Army would become Europe's largest resistance movement. Polish intelligence provided crucial Enigma decrypts and intelligence on German V weapons. The September campaign had ended on October 6th, 36 days after it began. But the Polish War would continue for 6 more years underground, in exile, and eventually in open rebellion. Poland didn't fall because it fought alone. It fell because it was betrayed. On September 1st, France and Britain had a treaty obligation to attack Germany within 3 days. They declared war on September 3rd, but they didn't attack. The French army, with 100 divisions, sat behind the Maginot Line. The British Expeditionary Force trickled into France. Meanwhile, 40 German divisions faced then divisions that could have been fighting on 2 fronts. Why? French doctrine was defensive, traumatized by Verdun. Chamberlain's government still hoped for negotiation. But deeper than caution was betrayal by design. The Anglo-French guarantee of March 1939 was meant to deter Hitler, not trigger war. When deterrence failed, they chose minimal honor, declaring war, but not fighting it, hoping Hitler might be satisfied with Poland. He wasn't. Poland paid the price. When the Soviets invaded on September 17th, Britain and France, formally at war with Germany, did nothing. No declaration of war on the USSR. No vigorous protest. They hoped to detach Stalin from Hitler, feared pushing him further into German arms. In the cold calculus of great power politics, Poland was expendable. This betrayal echoed through the war. When Polish forces reached the West pilots who saved Britain in the Battle of Britain, soldiers at Monte Cassino, agents who cracked Enigma, they found their sacrifice forgotten. At Yalta in 1945, Churchill and Roosevelt conceded Poland to Soviet domination. The government in exile was excluded. The Iron Curtain fell across its heart. Yet Poland's resistance outlasted both Nazi and Soviet empires. The September campaign became foundational myth. The heroes of Westerplatte, the cavalry at Massacre, the defenders of Warsaw, these symbols of national will sustained Poles through communist falsification. The Solidarity movement of 1980, which began the unraveling of Soviet power, drew on this legacy. The strategic lessons remain. NATO's doctrine of collective defense, an attack on one is an attack on all, was designed to prevent another September 1939. European Union represents the institutionalization of the lesson that European peace requires binding nations together. Blitzkrieg, perfected in Poland, became the template for mechanized war studied, adapted, eventually surpassed. The Polish underground state became the model for occupied Europe. But the deeper lesson is moral. The invasion exposed totalitarian evil for the world to see. The Nazi-Soviet pact shattered illusions. This recognition, slow and incomplete, shaped the eventual Allied coalition. Today, Westerplatte is a national shrine. Every September 1st, Poland commemorates not just the war's beginning, but the courage of those who resisted. The date meditates on sovereignty, on the cost of freedom, on the responsibility of allies. The shadows linger. The invasion demonstrated that international law without enforcement is just paper. That democracies, faced with determined aggression, often hesitate too long, sacrifice others' security for their own comfort. 36 days of agony gave way to 6 years of occupation, then 45 years of Soviet domination, then finally freedom. The invasion of Poland was the first crack in the world of 1939. From its spread, the fissures that shattered an old order and forged a new one. It began with a battleship's guns at Westerplatte. It ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And in between, it proved that even when nations are conquered, they are never truly defeated, not if they refuse to forget who they are. 36 days, 6 million dead by war's end. A nation erased, then resurrected. The invasion of Poland was the beginning of World War II, the laboratory of Blitzkrieg, the demonstration of totalitarian evil, the betrayal of small nations. But above all, it was a story of courage. 205 men at Westerplatte holding for 7 days, cavalry stopping panzers at Massacre, civilians building barricades in burning Warsaw. Today, Poland is free, its cities rebuilt, its memory preserved. The guns of the Schleswig-Holstein announced a war that consumed 70 million lives. But they also announced a resistance that outlasted the tyrants who started it. Hitler and Stalin are dust, their empires ruins. But Poland endures. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, subscribe and share. Because history forgotten is history repeated. And some lessons, paid for in blood, must never be lost. Thank you for watching. Remember, freedom is never free. It is earned by those who refuse to bend, even when the world breaks around them.